For the first time in years, your lightweight title is on the line in a fight that doesn't include Khabib Nurmagomedov. We have the former Bellator king, 3 times over, Michael Chandler, Iron Mike, taking on Bronx, Charles Oliveira. And Matt, I couldn't be more excited for a fight. As always, one half of your hosting duo, Craig Allen. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Craig Allen FNP. On my left, you're right, at Matt Allen FNP on the respective socials. Matt, we've talked about Michael Chandler for what seems like the longest time. If you're new to Fight Night Picks, again, we appreciate you, the likes, the subs, and so on and so forth. But we host a little show, and we're going to have it this week on Wednesday called This Week in MMA. We focus on PFL, One Championship, Bellator, the other organizations that aren't the UFC. And if Michael Chandler wasn't on your radar before 2020, well, holy smokes, is he ever now? Because this is a guy that weighed in as the alternate for your fight, UFC 254. You had Gaethje taking on Khabib. Unfortunate for him that neither one of those guys fell out, but he did get a great booking against Stan Hooker that certainly worked out in his favor, earning him this ticket. And for Charles Oliveira, one of the craziest win streaks we've seen in a long time. 8 fights in a row. Before his last fight against Tony Ferguson, a lopsided decision. 7 finishes in a row. And Matt, I got to read these out before I hand it over. Tied for first and most finishes in the UFC with Cowboy Cerrone at 16. Number 1 overall in submission wins in the UFC at 14. Number 2 at Fight of the Night bonuses at 16 behind Cowboy Cerrone's 18. And he's also number 2 at submission attempts at 35 behind Jim Miller's 45. Matt, what hasn't Charles Oliveira done but capture a title at this point?
And I mean, really, that's the only thing he has left to do, unless he rejoins the Ultimate Fighter, I guess, if that's something he really wants to get on the mantelpiece. But for Charles Oliveira, it's just been a wild ride to get to this title shot, because he's been in the UFC for a lot longer than I think people realize. He's been in the UFC for almost a decade now, and the fact that he has been able to stay around for this long, fighting the absolute best of the best, is really impressive. And I don't think anybody expected Charles Oliveira would finally beat Royce Gracie's record for most submissions in the UFC, but that's who it is. Charles Oliveira. Is it safe to say he's the most dangerous grappler in UFC history? It might be true, because Charles Oliveira is really interesting. He's one of the few fighters where he's not just in a set position when they're on the mat. He's everywhere at once, and I wish I had a better way to describe it. He just has this really unique way of floating on top of his opponent, or even underneath his opponent when he is on the mat. He's so dangerous on top or on bottom that really any second you're on the mat with him is kind of the equivalent of trading punches with Francis on the feet.
So let's go into it just a second. Let's go into it. You look at the 2014 submission of the year. You talk about it in a fight against Hatsu Hioki, where there's one of the most disgusting eye pokes you're ever going to see, to the point where Hioki takes Oliveira down, who's on his back, and he starts kind of pawing at his eye because it hurts, but I'm not in trouble because I'm Charles Oliveira. And then the action kind of moves around a little bit, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, Charles is going for a guillotine. Oh, this isn't a guillotine, it's a Peruvian necktie. Oh, submission of the year 2014. He can get out wrestled and then submit the wrestler like that. It's crazy.
He's a third-degree black belt in jiu-jitsu. He doesn't have to be good at wrestling. That's really the point with Charles Oliveira. He's going to get out-wrestled in this fight. Michael Chandler's a far superior wrestler, but why would you ever take Charles Oliveira to the mat? That's really my whole point. If you're taking him to the mat, you're just helping him do half his job for him. Yes, he was able to out-wrestle Tony Ferguson, but he's not going to be able to go out there and do the same thing to a guy like Michael Chandler. Michael Chandler's going to be able to judge where this fight takes place, and that's the really interesting thing that Michael Chandler has the power over, because if he feels like he's having success on the feet, he can dictate whether this fight goes to the mat or not. Whereas Oliveira, if he's having success on the feet and gets taken down, he's got to do everything he can to get the fight back up to the feet. And it's a lot of energy wasted for Oliveira. So for me, this fight has a lot of different wrinkles to talk about. But the first one that's most important, I think, is cardio, because I think these are two guys who have exceptional cardio. But it will be really interesting because both guys have a really high work rate too. And I do think both guys are going to kind of have to use their volume against the other. If you're Chandler, I don't think takedowns are going to be the key to this fight. I think the overwhelming amount of takedowns will be the key to this fight. Taking down Charles Oliveira once is kind of a death sentence, but if you can take him down and be positionally aware enough to not get submitted, do it rinse and repeat, Make him work a lot, that you can wear down on him as the fight progresses. Paul Felder knocked this guy out on the ground. That's kind of the whole point. Charles Oliveira on the ground, he's so dangerous with his submissions that he can somewhat kind of be lackadaisical and he'll just kind of lay there. And if you do have really good ground and pound like Michael Chandler has, you can really make him pay for it. So I do feel like Oliveira's grappling is kind of a double-edged sword. But on the flip side of that, Michael Chandler is a very powerful striker, but he isn't the most durable guy in the world when it comes to his overall durability with his chin. So it will be a little curious to see if Chandler's the one having success on the feet. and then he gets hurt, will he even want to take this fight to the mat afterwards, or will he just kind of risk it on the feet?
Well, if you look at Michael Chandler, and I know there's going to be a lot of people out there, you're going to fill the comment section, you're going to say, oh, Patricio Pitbull knocked out Michael Chandler. Patricio Pitbull's a hell of a fighter. He's one of those guys that's on that list of, he's outside of the UFC. It's a shame that he's how old he is now, that he didn't make it to the UFC. He wants fights with Volkanovski. He wants fights with the top guys, and I'd love to see them. They won't happen. But for Michael Chandler, listen, he had those contractual issues. Was he going to end up with the UFC? A few years ago, it didn't happen. He re-signed with Bellator. And then you look at the fighters that he's taken on. Is Sidney Outlaw all that good at 160 pounds when they fought at catchweight over in Japan? No. But Michael Chandler beat him the way you wanted to see him win. When he fought Benson Henderson, was Bendo over the hill? Yeah, maybe he was, but still, great win for Michael Chandler. Comes into the UFC, finishes the UFC guy, and now it's like, oh, he's gained our respect. We see how good Michael Chandler is. And this is a guy that they show it in the countdowns and the embeddeds. Does he drive from Tennessee to Florida sometimes to go to Sanford? Yeah. But look at the people he's training with at Sanford MMA. Look at the quality of partners. Look at the Jason Jackson up at 170. Look at Gilbert Burns at 155. We can go down through the list, but there's so many great fighters there at the gym. And you're also going to work on your strength and conditioning and so on and so forth. For Michael Chandler, the only thing that I worry about, out of all of the fights, out of all of the Bellator fights, and you can pick on them, you can nitpick, you can say, well, Brent Primus back at Bellator NYC, why did he lose? Listen, it was the old nerve situation.
It was weird.
It was weird. It was really weird. But then he beats Goto Yamauchi, who's a hell of a fighter. Then he beats Brandon Gertz, where he just picks him up, throws him down, pops his shoulder out of socket, and finishes Brandon Gertz. Then he beats Brent Primus in 2018. In Hawaii, great fight, really neat. There's one point, though, in the early rounds where Brent Primus gets Michael Chandler's back, and you go, oh, holy smokes, this isn't good. And then from then on out, Michael Chandler dominates the rest of the fight. Brent Primus, again, has a win over Chandler. He is the former champ. But the point is, Brent Primus is a really good fighter on the ground. He's a very good wrestler. He's very credentialed. He's just not at the same level as Charles Oliveira.
I'm going to push back on that argument. I'm sorry. The problem is, that was one moment in that fight. Do you want to know what happened for the other 25 minutes? Michael Chandler had beat Brent Primus, and it wasn't competitive at all on the mat. It is, again, this fight really does come down to the wrestling of Michael Chandler. And I'm going to say this. We both had him to beat Dan Hooker. A lot of people didn't agree with us on that. I have the same opinion of Michael Chandler right now as I did before that fight. They didn't teach me anything I didn't already know. What did Michael Chandler do in that? Well, he pressured, kept his head low, and threw wild overhands until one landed. Isn't that what he's done his whole career unless he gets the takedown? Now, yes, he did. He lands that great overhand left, hits him with all those, hammer fists there, Brock Lesnar style. And it was a great performance, but again, him beating Dan Hooker in that way didn't prove to me a single thing I didn't know. The other thing about that fight, too, Michael Chandler still is susceptible to leg kicks. He's not a fighter who, he was a victim of that calf kick, and then he turned that into a weapon that then he later used on his opponents. People hate it when I talk about Dustin Poirier, but it's the truth. Jim Miller did it to him, Justin Gaethje did it to him, and then you watch Justin Poirier kicks Max Holloway's legs, kicks Conor McGregor's legs. He's a fighter who, when you use something against him, and if it works, he'll use that in his own arsenal. With Chandler, even in the short opening of the Dan Hooker fight, he still does need a few leg kicks in that, and that's just one of those weaknesses that is always going to worry me about Chandler, because he's a guy who does plant and throw a lot, and if you can take away his base, you really get rid of a lot of the power that he brings into the fight. But with that being said, the amount of power he does bring into the fight is kind of ridiculous. At 155, I would argue it's probably him and Justin Gaethje who have the hardest just pound for pound punch in this division. I would argue Chandler has that kind of punching power. Again, though, my issue with Chandler is he's going to need the takedown to make this fight competitive, and I don't think Charles Oliveira is the kind of guy you want to take down just ever. Kevin Lee had a few moments where, yes, he was able to stay on top of Oliveira and not get submitted, at least earlier on in that fight, but then once Oliveira really starts to open up with his strikes, he forces a bad takedown attempt out of Kevin Lee and immediately submits him. Charles Oliveira really does have that one punch, one kill type of power, but it is jiu-jitsu on the mat, so for Oliveira, I think his striking's taken a massive leap throughout this last little run at 155. I think he was one of the weirdest fighters ever who he'd win at 155 and then immediately would get on the mic and be like, hey, featherweight, I'm coming back. I know I missed weight a few times and I'm great at 155, but I still don't think I'm done down there. That was just really weird. I'm really glad that we've kind of passed that stage of Charles Oliveira's career. But for Oliveira, I just think this is a dangerous fight for Chandler. On the feet, Oliveira has enough power to... I think he can hurt Chandler. I don't think Oliveira can knock out Chandler. I don't. I do think Chandler's a good enough striker to where he can at least stay defensively sound, to where he's not going to get put out by a strike, but I do think Oliveira can hurt Chandler on the feet. We even saw, go back to the Goiti Yamauchi fight, Goiti Yamauchi is a ridiculous grappler. Now, he's not on the Charles Oliveira level because, let's be honest, I don't really think anyone's on that Charles Oliveira level, but for a Bellator Charles Oliveira, that's a pretty good kind of comparison. Goiti Yamauchi rocks Michael Chandler in that fight, but after he rocks him with like a weird crane kick, he wasn't able to capitalize on it because his striking isn't at that next level. If Oliveira hurts you on the feet, he's just going to throw a ton of volume afterwards, force you to make a bad takedown attempt, and then he almost automatically has your back from that. I just think Charles Oliveira at this point in his career has really found a way to mesh his striking along with his jiu-jitsu in a way that I think is going to be really tough for any fighter who relies on a takedown in their MMA game, and that's why I like Oliveira against Chandler.
It's a really, really interesting fight. Again, you get the power punching, you get the wrestling out of Chandler. He's a classic. If he trained at any gym and if you pegged him for any gym, probably Extreme Couture. He's
Team
just
Alpha
one of those guys, or even Team Alpha Male. But you look at it for both of these guys. Chandler was overdoing it with Bellator. And then for Oliveira, 10 Performance of the Night bonuses, 3 Submission of the Night bonuses, 3 Fight of the Nights, 2 of them against Nick Lenz, 1 of them against Frankie Edgar. And it's just insane how his career's progressed, but that's it. It's the meshing of the striking with the jiu-jitsu for him. For Michael Chandler, wars with Eddie Alvarez, he won 1, he lost 1. And then after he lost Eddie Alvarez, he lost twice to Ill Will Brooks, who didn't have a great run in the UFC, but was a boogeyman over with Bellator for a while. And it's just interesting to see where his career's gone as well, because this is a guy that went from Strikeforce to Bellator. He fought Creed Zone. Can you take me higher? Scott Stapp, but not actually that Scott Stapp, but he did beat Scott Stapp with Bellator. And the losses are kind of wonky. The wins, holy smokes. But this is a guy, Division I All-American at University of Missouri, developed a bit of a kinship with Ben Askren and Tyron Woodley, names that you don't really love to hear around MMA these days. But with wrestling, it's great. And it's just interesting to see. Is he going to try and chain wrestle? Because that's something he used to be able to do. Will we see it? Will we see the power punching? Will we see the ground and pound? Michael Chandler, you know what you're going to get. Do Bronx, you know what you're going to get. So everybody out there should have a decent idea of what we should get should one of these guys win, unless hell freezes over and we get something totally different. But the odds on this one, Charles Oliveira open to minus 178. He's minus 133 at this point. Michael Chandler open to plus 146. He's plus 109 or thereabouts. We haven't looked at the Tapology votes. They're always fun. Holy smokes, 1,155 of them. 51% Oliveira, with 73% taking him to win by submission. For the 49% that have Chandler, 88% by knockout. It's really close.
It really is. And I was going to say, even before we went to the Tapology votes, I don't think I can remember the last time there's been a main event that's been this kind of closely contested up until, I feel like we've laid out good ways for both guys to win, but that's what I mean. Both guys have so many ways that they can win this fight. Michael Chandler and Charles Oliveira represent just really the peak of MMA. Like, they are specialists, but they're also really good in every other aspect of MMA, and that's what makes really the lightweight division, the welterweight division, the featherweight division, kind of those glamour divisions, so much fun. I couldn't tell you the last time I was this excited for a matchup, just skill set wise. Take the fighters' personalities out of it, take all the build up and whatnot. Just the skills of Charles Oliveira versus the skills of Michael Chandler is something that I think we can all get really excited about. But my last prediction, finally, I gotta say Charles Oliveira. At the end of the day, I just think if he hurts Chandler on the feet, I think that's going to open up a big enough window for Oliveira to win by submission. Now, I understand that might not make a lot of sense, but in a guy like Oliveira, he's really refined his striking to the point where Oliveira can go out there and outstrike a lot of guys at 155. He does have that really high, upright style, very Muay Thai-esque. And here's the other thing. If Michael Chandler had Vicente Luque in his camp, and if Vicente Luque was an active member of his camp throughout this fight camp, I'd like Michael Chandler a lot more. Because what does Vicente Luque do? He strikes almost exactly like Charles Oliveira. Now, yes, he doesn't throw those jumping switch kicks and whatnot, but they both have very high Thai styles. And yes, Luque probably hits harder, and I'd say Oliveira might be a little bit faster. But stylistically, I just think that would have been a great guy for Chandler to have in his camp for this fight. So finally, I like Charles Oliveira.
We'll have to see how the gas tanks react in this fight too. So it'll be interesting to see, can Chandler last against a guy like Oliveira? Can Oliveira last against a guy like Chandler? Whose pressure's going to win out? And in a fight like this, it really, really is tricky. Shoot the box versus Sanford MMA at the highest level. And Michael Chandler's never been submitted either, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. While for Bronx, if you go through it, his last loss, and now we're going back 8 fights, the Felder TKO loss. He lost to Lamas by submission. He lost to Pettis by submission. He lost to Max Holloway. Again,
That's a weird fight.
big names too. So
And at 145. That's the big thing about Charles Oliveira. Yes, the Paul Felder loss is at 155, but we talked about Kama Worthy like this a lot before he started getting knocked out at 145, but you know where I'm going with it. Or at 155, but you know where I'm going with this. Like, fighters can be fighting in the wrong weight class, and if you're Charles Oliveira, you're just so good that even though you are in the wrong weight class, you're still able to work your way up the ranks. I just think we're seeing, instead of Charles Oliveira, who is at like an 80% of himself at 145 because he was cutting so much weight, we're really able to see Charles Oliveira, who, let's say throughout 8 weeks of camp, he doesn't have to dedicate 4 weeks to getting his weight down and then 4 weeks to test his skills. He can now just dedicate all 8 weeks to getting better as a fighter, and I really think that's what he's done this last streak.
Matt, absolutely love the fight. I'm in agreement with you. I'm going with Charles Oliveira. I think, again, the pressure of the striking, the jiu-jitsu, and Michael Chandler, if he takes him down, maybe he will be able to be positionally aware enough, but I've seen wrestlers take on Charles Oliveira and get submitted quite easily. So it'll be interesting to see. I like Oliveira ever so slightly, but Matt, I absolutely love this fight. It is the definition of pop and popcorn being so close. We're going to be tuning in live with the Fight Companion, so you're going to have to tune in with us because those reactions tend to get pretty crazy. I mean, if I didn't queue up the one earlier for Chandler, I'll throw it in here at some point.
Oh, Michael Chandler with a beautiful shot. Dan Hooker is down and he is hurt.
Oh! Chandler's got him rocked.
No.
Chandler by TKO! Wow! What a debut by Michael Chandler! UFC lightweight, holy smokes! But wow, absolutely great card. Love all of these fights. Your co-main event, Dariush taking on Ferguson. There's so many. Grundy's taking on Vannata. That one might fly under the radar. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We're going to have a great week during this fight week. And as we always say, Matt, let's get into it.